Dear friends, another Saturday and another episode of Saturday Wisdom with me. As always, I will be raising some pertinent questions and also providing some implementable solutions for you to ponder. This week, I will discuss some points in law and what it means to remain on the wrong side of the law. There is a raging debate of the Narcotics Bureau versus the rest. Was it necessary to arrest Aryan Khan and others? Would it have been better to remand them to correction homes rather than incarcerate them in jails? Several such questions need answers, for we are all part of a reformative society rather than an action-seeking society. Law is a system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. It is built in this premise that laws are made assuming everyone would break them. Law as a system helps regulate and ensure that communities show respect and equality amongst themselves. Can equality exist in a society that is fundamentally built on a complex network of inequalities? The law shapes politics, economics, history, and society in various ways and serves as a mediator of relations between people. Is this the real intent and the narrative of law as it is practiced? A case is settled most of the times by a learned judge based on the contextual evidence produced. But then, neither the petitioner nor the defendant would be interested in presenting all that led to the contextual evidence. The investigative systems may not be as sensitive either. So what happens in the court on any particular day? One who is more articulate in presenting the information and data would probably win the day unless the honorable judge is extremely learned and analytical. Most of the times, what the petitioner or the defense presents may not necessarily be the truth. What can be the outcomes of interpretation of laws in such scenarios? Shouldn't such laws be outlawed? Merriam-Webster defines law as a binding custom or practice of a community, a rule or mode of conduct or action that is prescribed or formally recognized as binding by a supreme controlling authority or is made obligatory by a sanction made, recognized or enforced by the controlling authority. Very, very profound, even if it is subtle. Can a community's practice be a law? Are all communities bound by a supreme controlling authority? Several questions arise out of contextual settings. Unfortunately, contextual settings are subject to personal interpretations. These are the days when governments are debating the rights of people, do's and don'ts, and what to practice and what not to practice in a moral frame more than a physical reference. Can this exercise be seen as one of seeking subjugation? Traditionally, the one with power would control beings less fortunate and less privileged. The Old Testament dates back to 1280 BC and takes the form of moral imperatives as recommendations for a good society. However, moral imperatives have to be seen to be implemented. Which morals that need to be enforced is as vital. The Arthashastra, compiled around 100 AD, with material that is dated even earlier, and the Manusmriti, a couple of hundred years later, were the foundational treatises in India and comprised texts considered authoritative legal guidance. Manu's central philosophy was tolerance and pluralism. Taking a cue from this, why cannot we have a system of law that lays stress on prevention and reformative action than assume everyone is guilty until otherwise proved? The philosophy of law is jurisprudence. Normative jurisprudence asks what should law be, while analytical jurisprudence asks what is law. Both these questions need more credible answers in the context of current times. One important question we all must answer: as if a human being would always rebel unless chained? Will a human being always rebel unless he is chained? Man would want to rule the nature. Men would want to be one upon woman, or woman may want to do the same and rule every other form of life. Governments in power would want to rule everything forever. A strong being, irrespective of man, woman, or a child, would want to control the weak, each one to his or her own. Pressure groups are there. What do? Pressure groups eventually evolve and create their personal fiefdoms. Each such group would propagate a system of law that would suit their interests. Hence, the normative jurisprudence asking what law should be should veer out of the individual preferences and create a set of rules that benefit all, even if it leads to a utopian supposition. Unfortunately, analytical jurisprudence takes over, albeit with analysis based on insufficient or inappropriate information made available, sometimes deliberate and sometimes premeditated, and data that is created out of contextual settings. Then the gap between the normative and the analytical widens, causing great amount of distress in the society. It is said that justice is meted out, even if injustice is done to everyone in the same way and to the same extent. Many of our decisions seem to be driven by this antithesis. Sometimes quixotic expectations too take a toll. In 1991, Richard Overton sued Anheuser-Busch for $10,000, claiming the company had falsely advertised the scene of beautiful women and men enjoying themselves while drinking beer. Overton was upset when he discovered this type of lifestyle. It was not from reality, from merely drinking beer. His case was promptly dismissed. Interpretation of normative law is the crux of analytical jurisprudence. A very interesting piece of justice meted out will bear this out. Let me tell you that. A 2013 judgment by the highest court of this country divested the All India Council for Technical Education, AICTE, of all its roles, rendering it just an advisory body. No more regulatory powers and no more implementation role. Apparently, two principal definitions used for this conclusion were what is technical institution and what is technical education, as enshrined in its act. Great turmoil indeed for an organization that was explicitly built as a regulator. Functionally, the decision was reviewed and was allowed yearly extensions to avoid an apparent vacuum. Subsequently, in an unrelated case of deemed universities, the highest court this time round apparently uses the same definitions as above in conjunction with the objectives of the organization and rules that it not only will regulate technical education in affiliated institutions but also distance education across the country, and further extends the jurisdiction even to the deemed universities and possibly to all universities in the country. Simple question is, was this travesty of justice or plain contextual or an error of analytical jurisprudence? The powers that be also could influence the delivery of justice. Let's see an example of this. As a case in point, the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, NEET, which was declared illegal and unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 2013, was restored in April 2017 after a 5-judge constitution bench recalled the earlier verdict and allowed the Centre and the Medical Council of India, MCI, to implement the common entrance test. What was the normative basis in this case anyway? And what analytical base was used? The NEET is still objected to by some states like Tamil Nadu, with rejoinders based on discrimination on the basis of rural versus urban or state boards versus CBSE is unfortunate. However, they need to be addressed. As we try to be good citizens in a very complex world, I urge everyone to study jurisprudence, interpretation, and general laws. A book released by the Institution of Company Secretaries of India, ICSI. So a little more wisdom may dawn on us when we need it. It's another matter that we will still need to contend with the system. Friends, here is a reference to a very hilarious case. One of the most sarcastic rulings in Supreme Court history in the US came about because of some spoiled tomatoes. In short, A tomato supplier named Joseph Bertman was sued by the US government because the goods arrived spoilt. The court sided with Bertman because it wasn't his fault, but was the fault of the shipping company. Now, if you lose a court case and want to appeal, you have 60 days to file it. And if the government was going to appeal this case, Bertman was going to have to respond within that deadline. Simple. So the government simply waited to file until right before closing time on the 60th day. So Bertman wouldn't have a chance to do his part. Very clever on the part of the government. Bertman fought the government's decree all the way to the Supreme Court, where Justice Hugo Black put Bertman's predicament into words we all can understand. Listen to what the Honorable Justice said. Very, very interesting. I am aware of the argument that an able, alert, ever diligent lawyer could have, had he tried hard enough, discovered that the government had appealed even in the closing hours of the 60th day. I do not doubt that had Bertman's counsel been a superman, his X-ray eyes would have told him that a notice of appeal was being filed blocks away in the courthouse. Or had he been a lawyer with no clients but Bertman, he could have spent the 60th day hovering at the clerk's office to see whether the government would file a notice of appeal. But Bertman's counsel is not a superman, nor should the law expect him to be a superman. Despite Justice Black's eloquent argument, Bertman lost the case. Technically, Uncle Sam didn't break any laws in this. And unfortunately, the courts are there to declare only what is illegal, not what is merely lousy. The lesson is apparently that the next time you are up against the government, maybe you should hire a superman as your lawyer, as Judge Black sarcastically observed. Friends, so we come to a close to this week's episode and hope you enjoyed it as much as I did bringing it to you. Have a happy week and namaskar, dhanyavad and thank you.